Hello and welcome back to Hudson Auto Films.
Nice.
Thank you.
Welcome back to another episode on the 4x4 Aston. And as you can see, I'm joined by my wife, Leah.
Hello.
If this is your first time tuning in, we are embarking on combining a Land Rover Discovery and a Aston Martin Vantage. If you haven't seen the previous episode, so far we have completely stripped down the Land Rover Discovery, dragged the Aston body onto it, cut out the Aston floors so it can sit lower on the Land Rover chassis, and then last week we got the front end on and properly mounted the Aston to the Land Rover. Today's plan is to make a custom floor for the Aston. Obviously we had to completely remove the Aston's original floor, and the Aston body is sitting slightly below the Land Rover chassis, so we need to make a completely new mounting surface and raise the floor. Along with that, we're also going to put the dash frame back in and hopefully start mounting the pedals and the steering, so things are really amping up.
So the first thing that we're going to do is remove the edges of the Aston floor. And we're going to clean everything up so we have a good mounting surface for the new floor.
Okay, so there we go. As you can see, Leah has done a great job at trimming down the edges of the Aston floor. We're leaving this front bit for now. We'll be cutting it in a few minutes' time. But before we did that, I kind of wanted to get the dash frame back in so we could have a sense of our cabin area. Obviously, right now, we have all of this space, but it's a little bit unknown where we'll be sitting, where the dash will be coming out to. So before we pick a line and finish off the floor cut, I think we should chuck the dash back in so we can kind of understand our cabin a little bit more. But in order to do that, it seems like a good time to strip off some of the unnecessary bits of the Aston dash. So let's do it. Okay, so here we go. It is really cool having the dash frame in. It really makes it feel like more of a car. It certainly allowed me to figure out really placement of where we'll be sitting in the cabin, as I'd kind of lost touch with where that was, which dictated kind of how much I should cut, where I should cut from. But I've cleaned everything up. There is still kind of the finishing work needed when it comes to cleaning, rough edges. That is all still very much in play, but there's no point doing that now, as there is a lot more cutting and messing around to do. But now it is time to start putting in the new floor. Okay, so here is the plan. The reason we removed the whole overlap is because we're going to create a new lip. Obviously the floor level is going to be different to what it was. The Aston floor actually sits kind of below the level of the Land Rover chassis, so we need to create a completely new level of floor. So there was no need for the remnants of the previous floor. But what I'm going to do is find the level we want for the floor. We're then going to drill and put a strip of riv nuts along each side of the sill. And then using this wide, thin box section, we'll put a strip of it along here and basically bolt through it into the riv nuts. Then essentially we'll have a brand new lip going across at the right level for our new floor, which will then allow us to bridge across and have a secure floor. So that's the plan. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so the first beam is test fitted. It's just held in by one bolt, but what was very convenient is the riv nuts in the sill actually were exactly the size that I intended to use, so I was able just to slot that one on immediately. What was also very convenient is basically I wanted the floor to sit just a little bit above the chassis rails, and the position that the factory riv nut allowed me to drill into basically put me along this seam. You can kind of just see. So it is a perfect flat mounting space for the new floor beam to sit in. So that is all really good. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to make sure it's level. I'm then going to put another bolt in and obviously a new riv nut into the sill. I'm just going to leave it at 2 at the moment just to keep everything secure. Further down the line, I'll put a bunch more bolts and riv nuts into our new lip, which will be essential for the rigidity of the floor. But right now we're just in the building stage and figuring everything out. And once I've got that other bolt in, it is time to do the other side, and then maybe we can start messing around with the floor itself. So why do I have a big dirty piece of plywood? Well, that's a personal question. So version 1 of the floor is going to be made out of plywood. Why is that? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1 is budget. The cost of a big sheet of steel or aluminium is very expensive, and right now I don't have the budget for that. I need to prioritize other things. Number 2, I want to make sure this is right before I spend all that money on a proper floor in a few weeks' time. I want to cut this so it's perfect. If there's any mistakes, it's not the end of the world. I've got lots more plywood. So then after we've tested this and we're happy with everything, then this can come out and be used as a template for the steel or aluminium floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start measuring things up and cutting and fitting this in. Basically the way I see it, I'd like to create almost a one piece up until about here. Then the final bit of the footwell will be a separate piece because I want it to be thinner so I can curve it. Again, once we're working with steel or aluminium, that'll be much easier, but in this case, I'll need to add a couple of bits. And then the back section we probably won't tackle today, as that is just kind of a cover plate to cover the back of the Aston. It never had back seats. The Vantage only had 2 seats. So we just need to create something there, but that's a little bit later down the line. If you're wondering where Leah's gone, she has nipped back home, but she is coming back shortly, hopefully by which point I'll have a temporary floor fitted. So let's go. Before we go any further, today's episode is sponsored by 70mi. They've kindly sent me over their A810 HDR dashcam kit. As you know, I'm a bit of a dashcam connoisseur and this did not disappoint. What's great is the kit comes with everything you need to get going and start recording. As you can see, it was a pretty rainy day when I was installing this, so I was not in the mood to be out in the rain for long, but luckily it was super easy. The A810 has some pretty smart tech, including 4K Ultra HD resolution thanks to the Sony Starvis 2. And at night, thanks to 70mi's Night Owl Vision, the image is just as clear. The kit also benefits from HDR dual channel recording for either interior or rear view recording. It also has time-lapse recording, and if you add a SIM card, you can benefit from instant in-app security alerts, live streaming, Find My Car, and real-time route tracking. And with Guardian mode enabled, using AI motion detection, you can rest assured your car is safe even when you're not with it. So please do go and check out 70mi. I've left their links in the description. There's also a discount code listed below, so please do go show them some support. Sponsors like 70mi make episodes like this possible, so thank you to them. Okay, so we have a rough draft of our floor. This is why making it out of wood is a good idea for the first time round, as I can already see a couple of very small things I'd change. Nothing major, but for example, I'd leave a bit more material on the notch out here, as we don't need as much clearance as I thought. But overall, I'm very happy. One thing I'm sure a few of you will be thinking is, why is there no support going across? Without any cross support, inevitably it will start to sag and start to sit on our chassis rails, which we don't want, because it will start causing vibrations and all that sort of thing. Not to mention, obviously, just securing it around the outside is not enough. As I wanted the floors as low as possible and as close to the chassis as we could get it without touching, this limits us, as we can't have box section going across, as it would clash with the chassis. However, we've got two seatbelt mounting points here just underneath. So what I'm going to do is mount a simple crossbeam between those two mounts. They'll have rubber bushes, and then the top of the beam will have a small bit of rubber on it, and then they will be bolted through. So we'll kind of have a disconnected support section in the middle, if that makes sense. But that'll either be later in the episode or next week. But what is next? Like I said, before we kind of go any further with bolting in the floor, we need to place a few more integral components, like pedals, like steering, and get those things to kind of roughly sit where they're going to be. So let me show you what we've got to tackle in order to do that. Everything is very sharp. Okay, so this is what is left of the Land Rover Discovery bulkhead. And while it looks a mess, it holds the key to making this thing drivable. It has the whole steering assembly, it has the whole pedal assembly, and it also has the brake booster and master cylinders. All of this wiring can be discarded. We don't actually need any of it to run the car. The only thing which might come into play is the gauge cluster, but I'm not really too sure at this stage. I'd like to get some sort of race car digital dash, which has just all the essential information, but we'll see. But it's time to take the essential parts off this and then discard the rest. So let's do this. Okay, so there we go. We've removed the important bits from the remnants of the Land Rover bulkhead. As you saw, I also whipped out the Aston steering column, clearing the way for Land Rover. I'm fairly confident in saying that getting the Land Rover pedals and steering to fit in the Aston is going to be by far the most challenging thing in the build so far, and possibly the most challenging part of the build altogether. These were designed for such a different car, such a different bulkhead profile, such a different cabin, but we're going to give it a damn good go. Before we start, I'm going to quickly show you a couple of areas that I think might cause problems and my kind of ideas to overcome them. I'm sure we'll run into lots more on the way, but let me show you what I initially foresee. The first problem, and perhaps an obvious one, is the length of the Land Rover steering column. As you can see, part of it is just down there, and then the rest is obviously here, which we just took out of the bulkhead. I know we'll be able to get this in. The main part is more kind of how close to the Aston dashboard will it have to sit. If you take a look at the Aston one, you can see where the front two mounts are, and it's got about 6 to 8 inches in front of that. If I take you in here, that is where those two mounting points marry up, so it means it comes out to about here. Whereas the Land Rover one has a lot less material on the top quarter of the shaft. So I'm not overly concerned about the difficulty of actually fitting the Land Rover steering column, more whether the standard length will bring us far too close to the dashboard. If that is the case, we'll have to extend it, which I mean is very likely with a build like this. You would expect to do that. But it would be just wonderful if it turned out that it would fit without modification. Second issue I see, as you can see, the brake pedals and the brake booster and all the master cylinders sit on this one panel, and it's very convenient. Whereas if I take you into the Aston engine bay, you can see that's where the brake booster was, that's where the master cylinder was, you can see that hole is where the steering went through. So they're all mounted separately. What would be fantastic is if we could trace the same cutout as we saw in the Land Rover bulkhead and then just fit that in. However, the issue I see is the Aston subframe mounting portion, which obviously we're using for our front two mounts. So whether we can remove the right amount of material to fit the brake system in, well, we'll have to wait and see. So one of the first steps will be taking a template of this and putting it against the Aston to see, well, where we're at. But other than those two major potential problems, I think things are looking pretty good. I'm not sure how far we'll get in today's video getting these mounted. I'd love to have them test fitted, but we shall see. It all depends on what problems we run into. But enough talking, let's do this. Okay, so we now have our pedal and brake assembly loosely bolted in. I've had a little bit of a mess around with trying to get the pedals to sit where I think they should be, and I'm pretty happy with where they're sitting. Right now it is bolted in, but only there and round there, so it is firmly in place, at least for the purposes of now fitting the steering and getting the placement of that right, but you certainly wouldn't want to take it on a long trip. But I'm happy with the position of it, but to mount this properly we are basically going to have to make a bracket which is much thicker. This is for two reasons. Obviously the bulkhead is quite thin and it's aluminium, which tears quite easily. So to have that kind of pressure put on the bulkhead constantly would not be great. So to have a thick bracket which basically spreads the pressure applied across the bulkhead is essential. And the second reason is the profile of the Aston bulkhead is quite curved, whereas the pedal box is quite flat. So obviously there's a few areas where it's not marrying up perfectly. So we also need a bracket that kind of makes everything flush. The only slightly annoying thing, which is really a non-issue, as you saw, I modified the bottom of the pedal bracket. That is because it was clashing with the Aston bulkhead, but as a result, that allowed the pedals to sit a lot lower, which is good, but that means I now have this gap above, because obviously I cut out a little less than the essential amount, but because now everything's sitting lower and the bracket itself is different, we now have that dead space. So a little bit annoying, but nothing really to worry about. The bracket will cover all of that and it won't be visible and won't cause any structural issues. The reason I'm not making the bracket right now is primarily access. As all of you know, the chassis needs to come out and the body needs to come off as the chassis needs renovation. So when that's happening, I'll have full reign over the body to not only clean up everything as I've constantly kind of mentioned, but also to make a proper bracket. I'll have all the space I need to get around it. So right now it is in its reference position and the next thing is to indeed see if the steering fits. And to help with the steering, I have brought back the expert. What do you think of everything?
It's great. It's great to be here.
Nice.
First of all, I haven't learned how I'm going to actually get up into this car. I am just sitting on a block of wood. Oh, I get it. It's a rocking chair.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Now turn it. Wow. Nice. Well, there we have it. The steering wheel and the pedals are test fitted. Those two little brackets we just made are incredibly rough, and all they're doing right now is just supporting the steering wheel. They will not be enough to support it long term, but in the next episode we'll make something proper. But it's actually ridiculous. The car now turns. As you just saw, we only did a very slight turn as nothing is properly mounted up, but it's working. So what an insane milestone. Obviously, like I mentioned, we need to make a proper bracket for the pedals and we need to make a proper bracket for the steering. But that is some fun for next week. I've messed around a little bit with seat height and the placement of everything, and generally it feels pretty good. Obviously this seat is not very representative of the final seat, but yeah, it feels comfortable to sit, turn and use the pedals. Like I mentioned, we'll have to mess around with the gear knob, making it a little bit closer perhaps, but overall it feels pretty nice. It's kind of amazing how relatively easy everything went in. There's someone over there, I just see her through there.
Relatively easy.
It was relatively easy. There's a brush in front of your face. It looks like you've got a red moustache. So what a successful day. We removed the remnants of the old floor, put in the new floor support. We obviously need to put another one in the center next week. Got the pedals in and got the steering in and hooked up. So yeah, pretty successful.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy yourself?
I think, yes, I did enjoy it. I thought it was a very satisfying experience. Like, you put in the hard work and then, like, all of a sudden the wheel turns the tires and it's pretty exciting. Some of it's very loud, but it's okay. It's a lot of fun, actually.
So will you be here every week from now on?
No, absolutely no. I have other things to do.
So you're not going to give up your music career and become a mechanic?
No, but if you guys want to go to Spotify, Leah Marie Johnson on Spotify, I make music. I don't just work on cars. Just a shameless promo.
When she's not building 4x4 supercars, she's making music.
Yeah, no, but I'll come back like once in a blue moon, probably.
Okay.
Probably not.
Haven't really talked to you guys about is there is going to be a mega road trip at the end of this build, which Leah is very keen for. So,
Yes.
And we've got a deadline for it, which is it's looking like February. So lots of work to be done, but it is coming together. Things are really, making progress.
Yes.
So next week I'd like to make proper brackets for the steering. The pedal bracket will need to come along a little later due to accessibility, as I mentioned earlier. I'd also like to make the center mount for the floor next week. I'd also like to make a start on the ancillary frame next week, which will support all the loose hanging things in the engine bay. And if we manage to do that, we might be able to fire this thing up and move it for the first time. Maybe.
That'd be exciting.
But you'll have to tune in next week. So if you enjoyed this episode, and even if you didn't, please like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment, all that sort of thing. It really does help me out. If you'd like to support the channel further, please do check out the Patreon. I've linked it below over there. I post bonus content, early access, all of that sort of thing. But regardless, I'm just pleased you're here. So until next time, take care and I'll see you then.
Bye.